What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some of my gaming pet peeves, if you will. As somebody who plays a lot of games, let's be honest, there are certainly plenty of things that irk me in some way or another, or that I find especially annoying. Now, in many cases, I'll refer to these as pet peeves because they, on their own, don't necessarily rise to the point of being an actual problem, so much as just a general annoyance on my end. Now, some cases, especially if these things are repeated or even interconnected together, it can certainly become more of an issue where collectively it kind of shows just a general lack of polish or attention to detail, that kind of thing. But in the case of any of these individually, I'm going to be annoyed for sure, so let's go ahead and talk about them. Now, we'll kick it off with a nice and easy one, one that I would say is fairly universal, but games are finally starting to do something about, and these are games where you have to follow somebody as part of an escort quest, or they're simply walking slightly across town to a different destination, that kind of thing, and yet your run speed or your sprint speed is just a little too fast for how they walk, and then your walk speed is just a little too slow for how they walk, so you've constantly got to adjust. And given how universally hated that was, developers did eventually start to do something about it with typically a form of an interact that'll allow you to follow that particular target. This way the game just lets you keep pace with them, especially in a moment where you are not necessarily actively engaged in any meaningful gameplay and you're more than likely just listening to dialogue between the two characters anyway. Having to just ever so slowly manage your exact movement speed while you keep up with this person who's doing a whole lot of nothing is incredibly annoying. Now, while that one has been, I would say, around long enough to start being addressed, some of these others not so much. In fact, I've seen many of them very, very recently, to the point where I've started to anticipate it. That is to say, I'll see marketing material or trailers, that kind of thing, where I can kind of get hints that one of these might be about to happen, that kind of thing. But probably the simplest being NPCs that just will not stop talking. Some games have allowed you to adjust this after player feedback as well, but it's hit or miss. There nonetheless have been games that will actually let you adjust the frequency of how often NPCs will either offer hints about the current situation or just how frequently they'll talk in general, and features like that go a long way towards fixing this issue. But to give a very recent example, I'm going through Horizon Zero Dawn for the first time recently, and that's definitely a game that could have taken some cues here for NPCs to just stop talking for a second, especially after you clear an objective. Specifically, if you clear a bandit camp, sometimes an NPC wants to talk to you afterwards, and personally, I like to go loot all the bandits I just killed before I go taking on any quests so I can pay a little more attention. Except in Horizon Zero Dawn, I would say roughly like every 3 to 5 seconds, they're constantly like, hey, I need to talk to you, and it just gets old very, very quickly. Now, to give an upcoming game as an example, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 actually has shown off that your character will have a voice in their head as part of that experience, and even in some of the trailers they've shown, that voice has already been kind of annoying to me, which I just wanted to highlight because it's the kind of problem that has kind of become preemptively frustrating before it's even for sure in there, which is why I appreciate features that allow you to take a little more control of this. Now, to switch gears a little bit for our third one, the bane of many people, we've got multiplayer achievements, especially in games that are predominantly single player. So, as somebody who 100%s a lot of games, these can just be generally annoying in the sense that I don't necessarily want to play a primarily single player game just to have to turn around and take part in like optional co-op as an example. But there's actually one reason in particular I hate these more than that, which is, simply put, multiplayer services don't always last forever, especially in games where they're not the main component. That is to say, servers get shut down, functionality gets just axed. It can come to a point where that part of the game no longer functions. To give a very specific example of this, I have a game called Darksiders 2, and that is a game I will never have the 100% on Steam specifically for because it came with an achievement to send an item to a friend via a sort of optional online network thing where you could send stuff you found to friends who could make use of it, that kind of thing. Except that service no longer functions. It is a non-existent feature, and there is an achievement for using that feature So for me at least, this one's twofold. I don't necessarily enjoy engaging with a lot of multiplayer stuff these days, especially since my days of MMOs are long behind me. But also because, again, sometimes the functionality just stops working and you're left with achievements that will be permanently unachievable, as it were. So a frustrating experience, to be sure. Coming up towards the end of our little video here, we then have, I want to say forced or bad stealth, but that's not exactly true. You see, what I'm talking about involves stealth, yes, but it's more about missions that are in games that don't actually have a stealth system to begin with. It's happened enough times that I've developed a bit of an aversion to it, but I don't know if there's an exact word for it. So an easy example of this is Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader, actually. So Rogue Trader is a CRPG that does not really utilize a stealth system, and yet one of the final quests for your companions, Jay Hidari, randomly has a stealth mission in a game that doesn't actually have any stealth in it, which basically means you have to do what most of these games do in that situation, which is just kind of generally avoid the enemies you see. And it feels bad, it plays bad, and it's very silly. Now, I use Rogue Trader as an example there, because it's just the most familiar to me off the top of my head, but it is a common enough thing that I've seen other games do. And I think the simplest thing here would just be to stop doing that. You're not making a stealth game, there is not a stealth system present. Why are you putting stealth missions in? That just doesn't make any sense. Change the approach at the very least. So that's kind of my main thing there, just stealth missions in games with no stealth system. But there is a slightly sort of part 2 to this entry, and that is games that have a stealth system that is really pointless. A small TRPG that I reviewed relatively recently that came out just a bit ago was Chains of Freedom. So Chains of Freedom is a relatively linear turn-based tactical game. It has a stealth system that will let you bypass some of the early encounters, except the thing is, it's entirely superfluous. It doesn't need to be there at all, because really you should be fighting most of these guys simply for the experience in the tactical battles, but also because you don't want to become too reliant on it anyway. Since the sort of back half of the game, they seem to have forgot they had this feature in the game, and things become impossible to stealth your way around anyway. Which is another way in which stealth can just be very poorly implemented into a lot of games, and I'm really not a fan of when that happens. Like, I don't necessarily need some incredibly well thought out stealth system, but you gotta have the basics down at least. Now, to sort of bring this video to a close, for our final entry is really all about effort versus the reward acquired for said effort. Now, the thing I tend to find that this comes up the most with is usually collectibles. Now, generally, though, it can apply to pretty much everything. Simply put, if you put a lot of effort into something, you obviously want a roughly equal, at least in your eyes, reward for having done so. And when it comes to collectibles, I've found that most games tend to fail this, but probably none more so than something like Breath of the Wild, believe it or not, where you can, if you want to, collect all 900 Korok seeds only to be given a reward that is as much of an insult as it is anything else. But realistically, this is the kind of thing that can happen with just about any game. In some cases, I wouldn't even say it's intentional. It's just that, for instance, the reward for having completed a collection that might have taken you, say, almost, if not the entire game to do, only then rewarding you with something like experience or some amount of money you no longer need is essentially irrelevant. Now, some games try to get around this by tying these collectibles to, say, your upgrade system or progression somehow. Even Breath of the Wild, that same example, does this by using the Korok seeds primarily to expand your inventory, at least for the first half of them, before you stop needing them after that and they become useless. And generally, I'm okay with that particular approach. It does just also then have to be balanced a bit against how difficult they are to collect versus how integral they are to your actual progression, so even though there's some give and take. But outside of things like collectibles, this can still pop up, like say an especially long quest that rewards you with basically nothing. But simply put, I just enjoy when the effort involved actually matches the reward that you wind up getting. which can occasionally be a relatively difficult line for games to walk. But I think that's as good a place as any to wrap up this particular video. Just wanted to share some of my pet peeves with gaming in general, as some of these had come up quite recently. And with that in mind, I'd love to hear about anything that particularly bothers you about games, things you nitpick about or just generally find annoying. Or on the flip side of that, if you want to tell me about anything really small that you particularly enjoy about a game, I'd love to hear about that too. Which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.